this is Rich. This is Mountain Slider Garage. Today we're going to be looking at our two test snowmobiles for this year. They're both 2022 Matryx 850s slash 155 sleds, QD2. Both have the 2.75 track, both pretty much identical sleds other than the color. We're going to be comparing these sleds. We're going to be adding some stuff to one or the other and to see how they compare, to see if some of the parts we put on are worth it for you, the consumer. And in the first episode today, one of our local Polaris dealers has had a lot of good luck and a lot of good reviews on the SLP 1.5 Performer kit for the Matryx 850 normally aspirated sled. So we got one of those kits from them. We're going to put it on this one and keep this one completely stock. We've tested both these sleds together. They pretty much have the same clutching. They both run almost 100% identical. So that was last week. We had these both out on the snow together. So we're going to install the kit on this one, and then we're going to go out and test these again tomorrow, see how that kit performs on one sled compared to the other. So if you come over here, we're going to look at see what you get in your 1.5 kit for the Matryx 850. This costs just a little over 1,100 bucks. You get a lightweight silencer. It's going to knock some weight off your sled. Ceramic coated, really kind of a cool looking piece. You're going to get some new clutch weights, designed a little different. These are nice and adjustable. I like these. They have the little hole up the center there where you can add and adjust weight without having to take magnets in and out, take your machine apart or your clutch apart to do that. I really like. Comes with a new clutch spring, and kind of the heart of this is the SLP billet head, and then you get some other little things here to help put this together, a little rubber O-ring to mount your muffler into your belly pan, and a spring and a couple other things. So we're going to install this into this sled, and then we're going to go ride these tomorrow. We're just going to see how they compare. Now this kit says it adds just under 8 horsepower to your sled, mostly throughout the RPM range. That sounds like a pretty nice amount, but remember, these sleds have 160, 165 horsepower to start with. And so adding 7 horsepower is not a huge gain. So I think it's just going to make it a lot more snappy on and off the mid-range and give us a little bump on the top end and power-wise because of the head. And then also the clutching help us get a little bit more of that power to the track. So I'm thinking we'll see a pretty nice little gain with this in the added power and the added clutching of this that will help us use that power when we're trying to dig through the snow. So we're going to tear this sled apart. You don't need a lot of tools to do this in your own garage. You are going to need a clutch puller to take your clutch off, just to put the clutch parts in, and a spring puller to pull all the springs off your exhaust. And then when you put the head back on, you're going to want a torque wrench to torque it down correctly. So we'll take you through that process really quick. We're not going to spend a lot of time on it because this is more about how the two compare than it is to install the stuff on the sled. So join along with us as we put this on. Then we're going to go ride it tomorrow and see how they work. First part of this project, we need to remove our stock muffler and our stock exhaust pipe. And to do that, you're going to need a spring puller, something like this, so you can get in here and pull the springs off. Now, I'm not going to show you how to do this, but there's to get this, there's one spring here, there's one spring right here, there's one on top, there's one underneath this pipe on the bottom. There's this right here, which is the exhaust temperature sensor. You're going to have a 17 millimeter open end wrench to get that off. And then there's one other spring. It's right down in here. You got to pull that off. So there's 2 springs on the muffler, one here, one back in here, and then 2 where the muffler hooks to the pipe back there. On the other end of the pipe, if we look down in here, there's one spring there, one spring there. Then underneath there's another spring you can get to once you take your muffler off. So pull all those off, pull your muffler off, your pipe off, and everything else, then we can get to the cylinder head, which is right down in here. Okay, now that we have our hood off, side panels off, our pipe out, and our muffler out, we need to take all the other stuff off that attaches to the cylinder head. So if we come on in here, we're going to pull our spark plug caps off, and we're going to pull this off. This cap is actually your water temperature sensor. We're going to pull that off, and this is a 13 millimeter bolt here, and I've already loosened it. This is our knock sensor. We're going to take that out. And don't lose that bolt. I've already loosened the spark plugs. We'll leave those loose for now. We're not going to take those out yet because we don't want anything falling down in those holes. The last things we have to take off are the attachment for the coolant. There's this big clamp here. We need to get some pliers, clamp that, pull it back. Here's another one we need to clamp, pull that back. And then we need to drain the coolant down enough. In order to get the coolant down far enough, we are going to pull our cap off here, put a suction down in there, and suck out as much coolant as we can. We'll try and get the coolant level down to below where the cylinder head is, so we can take it off without having to drain all of our coolant and then be able to put it back in. So we'll get to that point and then we'll put our cylinder head on. Now we've gotten everything cleared off here. You've got these clamps pulled back. I pulled out the water temperature sensor, this thing right here, and I have my suction hose going down on the top of the cylinder head there. That's going to allow us to suck the coolant out of the cylinder head and be able to get most of it out enough to where we can pull the head off without having to spill it all over the place. And now you can see down in the engine bay, I sucked with this suction hose all the coolant I could out of there. That's still probably not going to get us out low enough, so then what it did, I pulled this little hose off and put my suction hose down there and just suctioning out enough to get it down to where you can pull the cylinder head off, spilling coolant, and without having to replace too much without risk getting bubbles in our cooling system as minimal bubbles in our cooling system as possible. Now we've got everything detached from our cylinder head, the two hoses in the back, the NOx sensor, the water temperature sensor goes up here. Now we've pulled out all the cylinder head bolts that go to this. We've pulled our spark plugs out. Now the cylinder head bolts, you can either use the 6mm Allen head that's in the middle, or you can use a 13mm hex head on the outside of them. So we're just going to go ahead, we're just going to pull these bolts out. Then we're going to take our cylinder head off, and we're just going to inspect what we have inside of here. Cylinder head really shouldn't be that hard to get out of here. So we're going to look underneath it. Everything looks really clean, like it's been burning really well. Here's one of our O-rings. We're going to gather up our O-rings that have kind of come loose. And then we're going to just look down here at our piston wash. Top of our pistons look pretty good on both sides. We're going to get in there and rotate the crankshaft a little bit and really inspect the cylinder wells. But this engine really only has about 300 to 400 miles on it. So it's really just barely breaking in. So everything looks really good on it. And we're going to go ahead and we're going to put this back together in the reverse order. All right, now we're going to install the cylinder head. Now, before we do so, we want to make sure that we install the O-ring that goes up here on top of this. Those O-rings don't come installed. You have to install that on both sides, on both domes. And then when you put this back in, there's two O-rings on your cylinders. There's an outer O-ring and an inner O-ring. Make sure if you're going to reuse those, they're both in really good shape. There's nothing damaged. And also make sure that those O-rings are down in their groove, because you don't want that O-ring hanging over the edge. And when you tighten this down, it will smash that O-ring and then you'll have a leak. So make sure the O-rings are in place in your cylinder head, both the inner one and the outer one. I would recommend you use new ones. They're cheap. That's what I did. I had some new ones that I went and bought from the Polaris store. I have found it easier to install this without dropping the parts out. Put a spark plug on each side. That allows you to hold on to without the domes falling out. Then you can hold that. You don't have your domes falling out. You can just really nicely set this down in place right where it's supposed to be, so you don't dislodge any of those O-rings that are sitting down there on your cylinder head. And then once that's in place, you can start putting your screws in. So you're going to want to replace all of your head bolts that go in this, tighten them down finger tight, and then in your instructions for this, you're going to get a torquing sequence right here of how to torque these down. And you're going to torque all these head bolts down to 20 foot-pounds. You're going to torque your spark plugs down. You're going to reinstall your two coolant lines back here. You're going to install your NOx sensor right here, and then your temperature sensor right here. We're going to get to that point. We're going to reinstall all that stuff, and then we'll go from that point on to install the rest of this. Okay, now we have all of our bolts in our cylinder head tightened down finger tight. We're going to use this little map to torque the sequence down in the way that they're supposed to be, so they're torqued down correctly, starting in the middle 1 and 2, and then just go around. We're going to torque each of the bolts down. I don't have a foot-pounds torque wrench that goes down to 20 pounds. Mine stops at 30, so I had to convert my foot-pounds to inch-pounds, and so it converts to 240 inch-pounds. So I'm just going to go and tighten all these down and go around in the torque sequence that SLP supplied in the directions. So we're going to torque all that down. We're going to torque our spark plugs down and get the string all the way back together. And put the pipe on, the muffler on, just the way they came off with the springs. Then we're going to go ride this and see how it compares to the stock one. Okay, now get everything back together. Pipe on, our new SLP can on. Put Axys on both of the exhaust temperature sensors, and we put those back in. Head and everything's torqued down to where it's supposed to be. And we just got to put the plastics back on this. But the last thing we have to do is install the clutching components, the primary spring and the clutch weights that come with this kit. And those are the two things that are going to make probably as big a difference in this machine as putting the cylinder head on and adding the 7 or 8 horsepower that the can and the cylinder head add. So we'll do that next. Now we have our clutch off our machine. And we're going to show you just a quick little overview of putting the weights in this. To take your clutch off, you're going to need a clutch puller. SLP sells these. Service manual says to put grease on the threads before you take it off. I usually just use some anti-seize. Either one will work great. Any of the clutch tools you need, SLP sells those on their website as well. So anyway, we have our clutch off. We've already pulled the spring out, pulled the carve off. One of the things it says in the directions you want to make sure you do, whenever you pull a clutch apart, this whole system is balanced. What you don't want to do is take it apart, put it back together, and not have it balanced when you put it back together. If you take one part off like this and you put it off in a different orientation when it goes back together, you could throw the balance off and your clutch is going to vibrate and you're going to have some problems down the road. But the SLP directions say to mark your clutch before you pull it apart. You can see I put a black Sharpie mark down there, and down there. Most clutches are marked from the factory. Polaris usually puts an X on it. You can see there's an X right there, and there's an X on there. There's an X on your Spider, and there's also an X on your movable sheave. Just get in a habit of marking. It's just the easiest way to go to make sure you're never having problems in the future when you take something apart and you want to put it back together the same way you took it apart. So we have our little box of clutch weights here. We have a bunch of little weights in them. Our clutch weight looks like this. What you're going to do is you're going to pull out your pivot bolt that goes through your stock clutch. And now when you take this out, we're not going to reuse the weights that came out of this. We want to make sure where the weight pivots on here. See the weight pivots on there and goes up and down. You want to make sure there's no wear on that shaft. So run your fingers along it, just make sure there's no edges or anything. If there are, you're going to want to replace that and get some new ones from Polaris. When our weights go in this, there's also this little chart you get in your kit that tells you based on your altitude what weights you want to put in this. So most of our riding here in Utah is around 10,000 feet, a little bit higher, a little bit lower, but this SLP instructions here end. It goes from 8,000 to 10,000 and 10,000 to 12,000. So I'm kind of in this middle gray area between those two levels. In the 10,000 plus, it says to put in one set screw and one lock screw. And that's for the SLP 1.5 kit. Now don't get confused if you buy this kit because it also has the instructions for the stage 1 kit. You don't want to use those because it uses less weight. You're going to get one little weight like that and then one with the hole in it. The one with the hole in it is the lock screw. And what we're going to do is we're going to take our Allen wrench, we're going to put that down that hole and install this first. This is the set screw. This is the lock screw that locks it in place. You lock this one up against that one so they don't come loose. So we're going to put those in. The other thing is this, since this hole you're going to screw these in, it goes from here all the way down to there. Depending on where you put the set screw in this, where the weight, it's going to really affect how this weight reacts in your clutch. Like if you put the set screws here versus over here, it's going to affect how this clutch works. Like out here where you're going to want some more tip weight to really grip the clutch in the higher RPMs and to really shift the clutch out well. But you can play with those, depend on where you want those and where they might affect best for your machine. So we're going to get our little Allen wrench here. You're going to put these in. We're just going to screw this in to our weight. This is the set screw. I'm just going to start with it all the way down the end and then we'll just kind of see where we get from there. It also says in the directions you want your sled topping out with this kit on it between 8,100 and 8,200 RPMs. So when you're on the hill, that's super important to know what your RPMs are running on your sled. If you don't ever look at your RPM gauge and you don't know where your sled's running, it's kind of almost a waste to put something like this in if you're not going to be able to get your RPMs where they're supposed to be and have your maximal benefit from this kit. You really need to know what RPM your sled is running. 8,100 is kind of where I'd been doing it on my stock 850s. The instructions I say 8,100 to 8,200, and so that's where we're going to try and get this to run. So we have our set screws set in here. We're going to set our weight down in there. Now there's a specific orientation for this pivot screw to go in. It goes in from over here on the right side over to the left. You just kind of put that through and then put the lock nut on the other side. So you're going to want to make sure you torque this little pivot bolt down to proper torque. And then when we put our spring in here and we put our cap back on and our cover on like this, we're going to want to torque these down to proper torque as well. So we're going to get all this clutch put back together, put it on our machine. We're going to want to torque the bolt that goes down, holds the clutch on the machine correctly. And then we're going to get this thing all back together and we're going to ride it and we're going to compare it with our other machines. So, all right, now I got both sleds out. Got the Chaos with the 1.5 SLP kit, the other Chaos without. Really fun. I also got the T-Rex A-arms on this, the 34-inch. Makes it super playful and tippy It's really kind of fun to play on. But the 1.5 sled just seems a little more snappy, a little more power throughout. You can tell it's got a little more power in the mid-range. When you hit it, it pops the front a little easier. Really nice little add-on for this sled, super fun. It has a really nice sound to it, the SLP muffler, and it's a really great add-on for this sled. I'm really liking it. All right, so I'm on the stock Chaos. He's on the 1.5 kit. We're at 9,800 feet. All right, now I've had this sled out a couple times now since we put the SLP 1.5 kit on it. We've obviously put a wrap on it since that first video that we did when we installed the kit. DB&E wrap, super awesome. Anyway, back to the kit. If you're in the video, you know, I didn't get into a lot of detail on pulling the clutch off the machine, pulling it apart. This wasn't really a video about that. It was more about the SLP 1.5 kit. Anyway, super impressed with the 1.5 kit. For just over $1,000. Nice little add-on for this machine. It really helps with the clutching and also helps in the power department. And it was really nice having two stock sleds and to put the kit on one and be able to compare really side by side to see what really happens. And the video is kind of hard because we raced these a number of times, switched riders a number of times. We can't just show all that the whole time. And really the 1.5 kit really won every time. And I mean, it was a little bit difficult to get the same exact start in the snow and get a good line on each sled, but really the 1.5 kit really performs better than the stock kit. And you really don't see what it can do in the video though, the on and off throttle response and in the trees. Just makes it a lot more fun. You know, it has a little bit more pop on and off the throttle. And if you're trying to hop over a log or something, especially in the low snow conditions that we have early in the year, if you're trying to pop the front end up to jump over, get over a log or something like that, it really helps that little initial pop too when you give that throttle response. So for $1,000, really highly recommend it. Really nice little kit to give your sled a little bit extra oomph and help the clutching be a little bit more efficient. SLP's done a nice job, been in business out west for a really long time. They've always made really good products for all brands, but especially for Polaris, and really highly recommend it. Anyway, follow along later in the year. I think we're going to do something else to make this one to compare these two. We're talking about doing some SLP twins on this one, then comparing it with the 1.5 kit and just kind of see, because I know the twins have been really popular the last couple of years, and I know people have a lot of questions about them, whether they want to put them on their sled or not. So I think that'll be the next thing that'll go on this sled. So look for that video coming up in the next few weeks. And just back to the DB&E wrap, we just did a whole video on the wrap install. So if you ever thought about wrapping your sled, you weren't really sure about it, we kind of go through some details on how to do that, especially if you've never done it. So thanks for watching. Make sure you share the videos, like them, and get your friends to watch them, and so we can make some more and help you out on your garage as you're working on your garage and your sled. So see you next time on Mountain Sledder Garage.